Okay, I just wanted to touch base about Module 2 and make sure you guys have some information for your upcoming exam. I'm going to post it here in just a little bit. And so I wanted to point out some specific things as well as add some information that you are not going to have in your book that you will want to have when you go in to take the exam. So in Module 2, you are going to have a lot of fill-in questions, a lot of essay type questions that aren't necessarily essay. They are going to be list a couple of these, give a couple examples of these. You have a lot of charts in this chapter, so I would make sure you have access to those, whether that means, again, printing off your slides, printing off the actual charts from the book, having those open as you're taking the test, whatever you need to do. For the food labels, we are actually going to end up doing an activity on that eventually, but right now the big part of what you need to know is a lot about your daily requirements. What do we need? Certain amounts of. Basically, for you guys, I'm going to tell you, hopefully you watch this video, but you need to go to a website and calculate your own daily caloric needs. There's a bunch of sites that you can go to, so I'm not going to give you a specific one, but basically you'll type in your information. It'll give you your daily value that you should be consuming or burning to keep at a even level. And then I also want you to, within a lot of those same programs, you can do a calculation for how much of each component you should have. And I want you to do the 3: protein, carbohydrates, and fat. And so it'll give you typically an overall caloric breakdown. And then for the components, it'll tell you how many grams per day or something like that. And so you need to have that information for the exam. There is a question on the exam about that. And so if you look it up and do it ahead of time, that'll save you that much time when you go to take the exam. So that's a big part of kind of the food label section, knowing what certain things on the food label mean. So what does it mean if something is reduced fat versus fat-free? What does it mean if something's light? Okay, knowing that terminology. You have quite a few examples that you can look through. Like I said, specifically for the food labels, we're going to end up doing an actual project on that. So there's not a ton of questions on your test about the specific label aspect. You need to know what are some of the health claims, okay, that can be made in regards to the labels, and maybe some of the policies that have been implemented in regards to food labels. But that would be a good general information from that little section. When you get into kind of 2.2, you're going to need, again, you're going to start to see those breakdowns of how many different percentages in some different categories. And then really the big thing there is the MyPlate. And you're going to have quite a few questions off of the MyPlate, knowing the different categories, knowing how much you need of them. And then just kind of be able to pick out some information from there. Okay, so those, make sure you look over those and maybe have those specific things for MyPlate handy too, would probably be beneficial. You'll have to talk a little bit about physical activity specific to MyPlate, and then when you get into 2.3 or 2.4, actually, because 2.3 is more your MyPlate. When you get more into 2.4, you get more into those actual dietary recommendations, and there's different organizations and different charts that you're going to see. You'll see there's a 2010 dietary guidelines. And then a couple pages later, you get into there's an AHA diet guideline, there's an ACS nutrition guideline, that's 2008, and then there's a 2020 nutrition thing. And so a lot of what you're going to have to do is be able to give examples of those. What kind of things are we requiring? What do we want more of? What do we want less of? Okay, things like that. And then really when you get into the food exchange lists, we don't do a lot with that, but that's going to be beneficial to you in regards to doing some of your projects later on and knowing what you can change for what. And again, kind of knowing how those all fit into your guidelines. So in specific for your exam, don't forget what I already told you. You need to determine your own daily caloric intake level, what's recommended for you to stay at even kill, and then protein, carbs, fats. How much of each of those should you specifically be having every day based on your calculations? Make sure you write down where you get your calculation from. Okay, so a site, website, whatever it is. And then on top of that, obviously make sure you can always talk about the things I give you guys to do in discussions, because I do that for a reason. That's just to increase your knowledge base. So don't be surprised if I ask you about things that I've asked you about in discussions. And then a couple other things, well, one other thing that I want you guys to look into for this exam that is not in your book. I was hoping somebody would do it in the discussion, but they did not mention it. And so I am going to talk a little bit about it now, but I also want you to do a little bit of research on your own. And that's intermittent fasting, which has become pretty popular right now, and a lot of people are implementing it. And basically what that means, and it varies, you guys are going to see when you start to research, there's intermittent fasting where you only eat within an 8-hour period each day, all the way to intermittent fasting where people are fasting for days at a time. There's some certain programs where they say to start with the 8 hours, where if you don't start eating till noon, you finish eating by 8, and you don't consume any calories outside of that, and then kind of transition to making the window smaller and smaller until you do end up doing some full days of fasting. I want you guys to look into that a little bit and see what you can find in regards to positives, negatives, does it seem to be working, any of that type of information that you can find. And again, make sure you document where you're finding it so that when you do go to answer the question in particular about intermittent fasting, you have your sources available, because you always want to make sure you have sources for those things. And like I said, it's really common right now. So I was hoping someone would kind of talk about it in the discussion, but since you didn't, talking about it now. Once again, it's intermittent fasting, and it is eating only within a certain amount of time. That includes, there are a few things you can do in the time that you're not eating. I want to say like coffee, but you're supposed to drink a black. Obviously, you can drink water. So you guys can find some of that information and have that ready for when you go to take the exam as well. So I hope that gives you a good background and prepares you a little bit for the test so you know what to be ready for. This one only has 20 questions, but like I said, a lot of them you're going to have to fill in information or list things. So just give yourselves that full 2 hours to complete the exam. If you have any questions, remind at me or send me an email and let me know. It's due by Sunday night.